Today we're going to talk about a topic that's very near and personal to every chef, and that's knife sharpening. When you first get your knives, you want to inspect them, or even before you buy them, take a good look at your knives. You're looking for a good feel, certainly so that that feels good for you. But in terms of inspecting, you might want to check and make sure that the blade is nice and straight, that the tip isn't bent or broken, or that there's no chips along the edge of the blade. I have several sharpening stones here. The first is carborium and aluminum oxide, and this is a man-made stone. These are both the same, and they have two grits. There's a coarse grit on one side and a very fine grit on the other side. Generally, you would use oil as a lubricant on this type of a stone. The second one I have is a wet stone, and wet meaning that it's a water stone, so that you would use water as a lubricant when you're sharpening your knives on this stone. Some others, this is an Arkansas stone. It's a natural stone that's used for sharpening. There I have a diamond stone, which has diamonds on the edge of it that works very well. A ceramic stone, and I also have a tri-stone. This is essentially this stone mounted individually on this device, but I also have an extra stone, which is a coarse stone. It has, an oil well in the bottom, has 3 levels of grit, and so it's easy to work through with your knife, and it's nice and high. Sometimes, sharpening your knife gets confused with honing your knife, and the steel is used for that purpose. It basically realigns the edge of the knife. As you go and use a knife for cooking, the edge will wobble a little bit. You may get a little chip or a little ding in there. And what the steel does when you use the steel with the knife is it straightens out all of the edge. If there's a little ding, it'll smooth that out. So it really doesn't sharpen your knife, the steel. It actually helps to straighten the knife, make it appear to be sharper, but also makes your edge last longer. Carbon steel knives, which you don't see too much on the market anymore, this is softer steel, and they sharpen very quickly because the steel is soft and it removes metal as you're putting it on the stone. They also dull a little bit faster, so you need to resharpen them more frequently. Then you get into high carbon stainless steel knives. It's a harder steel, and that requires maybe a little bit more time on the stones, a little bit more pressure maybe. Because it's harder, it is a little bit harder to remove that steel. I'm going to use the tri-stone. In this case, it's an oil stone, and it has 3 surfaces. My knife is dull, but it's not really dull. So I'm going to skip the first coarse surface and go right into the second surface, which is more of a medium. Some things that all chefs agree on is the angle, and that's a 22 degree angle. And that's a pretty flat angle on the stone. I'm holding my knife firmly. I like to use 4 fingers on the blade and try to keep that angle. And you can see that I use the whole surface of the stone and drag it towards me. Do the same thing with the other side. So I'm sharpening it, trying to get an even stroke down the full length of the blade. And I'll go back and forth a few times. Then I'll turn it to a finer stone, which each time we go through a different grit, it smooths and polishes the knife a little bit more. So I'll give it a few strokes on this side. Same thing, holding that 20-degree angle. Using all of my stone, I'll wipe it off and take my steel, hone that edge a little bit more. One thing to keep in mind when you purchase a steel or you use a steel is that the length of the steel should be 2 or 3 inches longer than your longest knife. So I use the steel crossed in front of me. I'm making like a 45-degree angle, a corner, in other words, and just stroking the knife down there. I could also go like this. It doesn't matter which method I use. You see some people going this way, as long as you keep a 20-degree angle on the steel as well. I feel I'm rubbing my finger against the blade, and what I'm trying to feel and concentrate on is every little groove in my fingerprint. The more detail I can feel in my fingerprint as my thumb glides over the edge, the sharper that knife is. Another type of stone that you can use for sharpening is a whetstone. And this is referring to using water. This happens to be a special made stone. It has 2 types of grit, a 1000 and a 4000, 4000 being the finest. And it's used for water. It lubricates the surface so your knife drags down more easily when you sharpen it, but it also keeps it clean. And the liquid keeps the pores from building up. You need to keep a 22-degree angle on the blade. Too steep of an angle and you're just wearing the edge off, it'll never get sharp. You should also, while you're sharpening your knife, to be able to look at it, and at least 1/8 of an inch way down the blade, you'll see it polished. And that's where it actually is sharpening, by removing steel. Using a little bit of water, I use 4 fingers and you hold tightly, and you do apply a fair amount of pressure while you're doing this, and drag the knife down. I'll turn it over to the finer side, which polishes the edge a little bit more water, and a couple more strokes. So it's not that much different if you're using a smaller or a longer knife. You're basically looking for the same principles. So I'm doing the same thing, trying to maintain that 20-degree angle. Give it a couple more strokes on the 4000 grit. That polishes it up nicely. Use my steel again, same process, and check the edge. Trying to feel my fingerprint. Now, larger knives pose a little bit of a different sharpening knife strategy. You can see that this is a 14-inch roast beef slicer, and it's a little bit bigger than my stone. So I'm going to have to calculate my stroke a little bit differently as I sharpen this. So I need to drag a little bit differently than I did the last time. Keeping a nice complete stroke, following through to the end. I'll give it a couple of strokes there. I sharpen it a little bit more frequently and less strokes each time I sharpen it. Another thing that helps maintain the sharpness of your knife is to use this more frequently. Every time you pick up your knife, you might want to give it a couple strokes on the steel. As we said, that keeps the edge of the blade straight and smooths out any burrs or anything. It doesn't actually sharpen the blade, but it does help maintain the edge, and that will help you not to have to sharpen your knives any more than you need to.